Good evening, and welcome to Armageddon Live, Series 2, Episode 34, Structure of Daniel 8 through 12, Part 6, on this 1st of June 2020. I'm your host, Daniel Decrypted. Yes, it's been a little while. I missed yesterday, but I'm back. Anyway, let's move me out of the way. And yeah, so let's go and open up what we were looking at last. Yeah, so you recall our nice structure here. So we've got the middle with its 3 layers in it. Chiasm. Then we got the outer 6, the next 6 layers outside, out from the center. Finally we got the outer, 6, 7 layers. And of course the most important one is the first layer, which is this image. We got Mount Zion, or the glorious holy mountain. And on the glorious holy mountain is this fight between the ram and the goat. And this parallels the lamb on Mount Zion in Revelation 14:1. It's the exact same picture, except the goat is not pictured here. But the center is this, or the focus is the same thing. It's this controversy between the ram and the goat, or the lamb and... Oh, of course, here's another picture of the same thing, because here the courtroom of heaven takes place within the temple, and the temple is upon Mount Zion. And of course you can ask how we know that. It comes from this, Psalms 48:2. So it's Mount Zion on the sides of the north, the city of the great king. Alright, so here we have a picture of Mount Zion. Picture of Mount Zion, and up on the top of Mount Zion, in the northern side of this mountain of the city, is the temple. Now notice that it parallels with something else we all know about, right? Because notice it says on the sides of the north, and it's on a mountain, right? Mount Zion on the sides of the north. And then we read in Isaiah 14:12 and 13, "How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut down to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit upon the mount of the congregation," right? Mount Zion, "in the sides of the north." So the same picture, a mountain and the sides of the north. And that's supposed to represent heaven. So the physical Jerusalem and the physical temple mirror or at least their types, that is, their small pictures or incomplete pictures of heaven. In heaven, the mount of the congregation is, of course, we all congregate around the temple or in the temple. And the sides of the north tell us where the temple is, or specify the temple, as it is when you look at Jerusalem. The sides of the north is where the temple is. So the point of this is that the imagery that's used, or the imagery that you have for the physical Jerusalem, the earthly Jerusalem and the temple, is the same imagery that's being used for heaven and the place where God sits. Right? Because if you notice, my throne above the stars of God, I will sit upon the mount of the congregation. Because when you look at the temple, you see that Moses was told by God that he would meet Moses between the two cherubims above the mercy seat on the ark, which is in the most holy place of the temple. Anyway, so we have this thing that heaven is parallel in what is physically on the earth. Alright, now if we go into Daniel, so if we want to understand from Daniel who the ram and the goat are, I mean, we could say, yes, it really is parallel in Revelation, which I know it is, but I mean, that's one way of saying the ram is Jesus. But another way of saying the ram is Jesus is by looking at these equivalences here. So according to Daniel 2, verse 38, thou, King Nebuchadnezzar, art this head of gold. So king equals metal, gold, to be specific. Then we read in Daniel 2:39, and after thee shall arise another kingdom. Verse 39. Well, we know after Nebuchadnezzar was a bunch of other Babylonian kings, so it wasn't a kingdom that followed him. Unless it's also saying that the gold represents a kingdom. So thus we're saying that in the Hebrew mind, a king equals a kingdom. And Nebuchadnezzar is a perfect symbol of Babylon because he's the greatest king. He's the one who basically built Babylon. That's why when you look at Babylon, you have all these bricks with Nebuchadnezzar's name printed on them, saying he is the one who built Babylon. So it's a pretty good equivalence when you're looking at the greatest king. So king equals the kingdom. But we get the same equivalence also in Daniel 7. For we read in verse 17, these great beasts which are four kings which shall arise out of the earth. But then, so kings, the beast equals kings, but then you look at verse 23, the fourth beast shall be the fourth kingdom upon the earth. So once again you get in this idea that king equals kingdom. But we know that both Daniel but Daniel 2 and Daniel 7 are talking about kingdoms. Because Daniel actually tells us who the kingdoms are. Alright. So if we say king equals kingdom, then when we look at the ram in chapter 8, we're told, so the ram is in verse 3, but we're told in verse 20 that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. But using this king equals kingdom, and using Nebuchadnezzar as an example of what type of king it's meaning, then the greatest king of Persia, of the Medo-Persian Empire, would be Cyrus the Great. Right? He's the one who built or established the kingdom. And thus he's called the Great. But if we say, okay, the ram equals Cyrus the Great, right? Then it's interesting that you read in Isaiah 44:28 that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. Then you read in 45:1, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus. So Cyrus is a shepherd and the anointed. But that's basically what Jesus is, right? So John 10:11 says, I am the good shepherd. And then in Matthew 16:20 says, Jesus, the Christ. But Christ is just the Greek equivalent of Messiah, of the Hebrew Messiah, which just means anointed. So Jesus the anointed and Jesus the good shepherd. So if we have this equivalent, then the ram is equal to Jesus. All I can say is, yeah, you probably gotta take this stuff in slowly, but when you look at it all, I mean, and then it agrees perfectly with Revelation. And this structure, right, that we know exists there because we have all these. Let me flip back to that. This structure, we know it exists because it has all of these parallel passages that form this chiasm, right? So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, six basic ones that are in the colored section. That's not counting the ram versus goat. And then you've got another 6 in the gray section, and then you've got 3 more in the Daniel's prayer for his people. So that's a lot of evidence that a chiasm exists there. Then it's easy to say, okay, this must be there. And understanding what Revelation is talking about, I mean, it just is further proof that this structure is there and that this is really a picture that God wants us to see. But as I've said previously, I mean, it says that because there's a good reason for it to say it. Because God wants us to know that the center of the judgment is not us, it's Christ versus Satan. It's a judgment on this war, this controversy that's been happening for, according to the Bible, for 6,000 years. Anyway, oops, there we go. Yeah, I guess I won't go any further tonight, but there's further proof from Daniel 8 through 12, and I'll show that tomorrow night, that says that this controversy is at the center of that whole, those chapters 8 through 12. So for tonight, though, I guess we'll call it quits. And we'll go and we'll look at the other evidence tomorrow night, that this really exists. Well, for now, I guess we'll call it quits. I hope this was a blessing to you. I hope you learned something new from it. And I hope to see you tomorrow night. As for now, bye-bye. Until tomorrow.